Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Fritz Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. On this week's episode, we've got two powerhouses in what I guess you might call modern indie folk, though it's a lot more than that. Gregory Alan Isakov and Jeremiah Fraites. Now, Fraites is, along with Wesley Schultz, a founding member of the Lumineers, the band whose simple yet powerful take on folky Americana has been met with pretty massive success over the past couple of decades. The band's catalog goes deeper than massive hits like Ho Hey and Stubborn Love, songs you've probably heard even if you're not super familiar with the band. The Lumineers' latest album is 2022's Brightside, but that's not Fraites' latest. He just released his second solo album of intriguing, fantastic instrumental piano pieces, a big departure from the sound of his main gig, but great nonetheless. It's called Piano Piano 2, you can probably guess what the first one was called, and it stretches into even more cinematic territory than the first. Plus, it features a guest vocal from the other half of today's conversation. Gregory Alan Isakov may seem like an overnight sensation, but the Colorado-based singer-songwriter has been plugging away, sometimes quietly, for nearly 2 decades, building a fan base for his intimate songs over the course of 7 albums. His latest, Appaloosa Bones, came out late last year, and as you'll hear in this chat, the songs ended up being a bit more fleshed out than those on his past records. He's on tour now, and he's featured on the new Noah Kahan single as well. So yeah, kind of a big deal. Oh, and as I mentioned a minute ago, he collaborated with Jeremiah Fraites recently on a cover of Radiohead's classic No Surprises. Check out a bit of the magic they wrung from making the song their own.
A heart that's full of like a landfall, child that slowly kills you, bruises that won't heal.
In this chat, Fraites and Isakov talk about how songwriting never gets easier. Sorry, budding songwriters. About Isakov's teenage obsession with the Nintendo game Metroid and what that has to do with music. And about finding intimate sounds in massive places like Red Rocks, aka the best venue in the universe. Enjoy.
Check 1, 2, scrambled eggs, juice, coffee. Good morning.
Dude, you're still jet lagged from Italy?
Still jet lagged from Italy, yeah. I just released Piano Piano 2 last Friday.
That record is ridiculous.
Thanks, man. You texted me a couple nights ago just saying that you listened to it back to back, and I think that meant a lot to me because I know that you were a champion of the Piano Piano, the debut record, and you brought me out to open up for you at Red Rocks, and it just meant the world that connected with you.
I mean, that Piano, that record was huge for me. And we listened to it. We seed in the room right over for our farm, and that is constantly on rotation when we're seeding and in the early spring, like always. And then I was reticent to think you could top it. And then when we listened to it four times in a row the other night, and I was like, I think this might be better. I'm not sure.
I think I told you a few months ago, I was like, oh, this record's awesome. I was just feeling all the confidence and feeling sure. And then about a week from the actual launch of it, all that, anxiety that we experience as artists, all the second guessing, did I do too much? Did I not do enough? Started to seep in. It was like the toxic stuff got into the water, and had all this second guessing, like, oh, it's the sophomore slump. It's the classic thing where you try to, and then now it's just out. And it's a sense of relief that it's out. And it's also a sense of almost letdown. For me, my favorite part is being in the studio, the actual writing, like the actual, you work on something either by yourself or with other human beings. And that first time somebody hits spacebar and categorically you're the first person in the entire universe hearing that, that's such a high for me that I chase. And I think once the album is out, typically you do subsequent tour, which is great. I love traveling. I love all that. But man, if I had to if there was a gun to my head, tour or studio,
sure,
100 to 1.
I feel very similar. Every record I've ever made, it's the most intimate part of ourselves when we're sharing it and we're playing it for no one. And then you're like, I've bled into this thing. Now it's like I've changed the oil, like a million times on it. And you're not sure, when you get the mixes back and you're tweaking towards the end, you're like, I don't remember if this is good anymore. Some songs love being recorded, and then some just will never live on a record. And I don't know why that is, and I've tried. But I don't fight it anymore. I mean, we're in my studio now, and I've never liked studios, you know? I've never liked going to pro studios. I mean, when I was starting, I couldn't afford them. And so I was just always had a couple of mics and took this like Pro Tools class elective in college, you know. I was in the horticulture track, but I had like the one music Pro Tools class. And yeah, and part of that reason I couldn't afford it, the day rates of studios, was because I write a lot in the studio. You get that instant feedback of like, is this working right away?
Yeah, I think that Tom Waits talked about his songs and just the craft and art of songwriting almost as characters.
Yeah.
And he sort of said, you know, some songs you have to wrestle and bully. Some songs, you know, you try to dress them up and they don't want to be dressed up. And, you know, it can be a pretty frustrating process. And I think that for me early on, writing with Wes, me and him started the Lumineers almost 20 years ago. I think that in those earlier infantile stages of songwriting, I think there was this sort of graph where the more we worked on a song, the worse it got until it started to turn in the right direction.
Right.
And I think for me, the first song that comes to mind is a song off our first album called Submarines, where we had to just work on it so much because it had this sort of complicated time signature and how to sing over something like that and, you know, how to make all that work. So in the studio, that was one of the ones. And again, it wasn't really the studio. It was like my parents' attic. So it wasn't, you know, we weren't paying a day rate. There was
Right.
no overhead. It was just like, let's be artists and figure this out.
Yeah.
And I remember that was the first song where I was like, cool. I think this is the first song that we actually worked on it more and more, and it got better and better.
That's right.
And then I realized, okay, but I think we had to write 75 to 100 songs and fail at them
Sure.
before the first album. So did you find that too with your own?
Constantly, you know, my trash can is giant. We were just on tour a few weeks ago in California, and there was a kid waiting outside the bus, and he was like, you know, asking for advice and all that stuff. And he was like, I love your songs, they're so great. And I'm like, most of them are terrible. You just will never hear that. You know, you'll never know. A huge part of that is just the rewrites, like the drafts, and realizing like, oh, this one word for some reason takes me out of the song, or this one, like, can we just get a little bit of space after that image has been said? Because it's too fast to go to the next image, and let's write a little bit more music between those two lines. And just little things like that take time, you know.
Was it a kid?
Yeah, sometimes, you know, I don't meet a lot of people anymore on tour. I used to meet so many people.
Is that by choice or just by?
No, it's just, I think it's funny because when you start out playing bars and like small clubs, I used to sell merch, you know, in the front.
Oh, yeah.
And you meet all these people, and it was really cool. And then when the venues get bigger, there's like this whole back part of the venue.
Sure.
That's all gated off, and like, you don't see anybody. It's bizarre, which doesn't really align with my personality.
Yeah, no, it can be. I think that for me, going into like a sea of people in the back parking lot, it can be really overwhelming. Where I love obviously meeting fans and I love interacting with people, but I know what you mean. I mean, when we were starting out in bars and when there was more people on stage than there were in the crowd, we would literally say, which seems like psychotic now, but we would say, you know, this is our last song. We're going to go back and sell merch.
Yeah.
And does anyone have, like, can we sleep at someone's house tonight?
Totally. Yeah, we used
I
to do
remember
that.
playing a house show in Omaha, Nebraska. We slept at some dude's house.
Yeah.
And you just meet so like warm, welcoming people. And as the thing grows, it's nice though to have the hotel and the privacy, and just also not even that, it's just like the recharge that I need on. I think
you and I are pretty similar that way.
And I think a lot of people say, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And I'm like, well, I'm 100% introvert until I'm 100% extrovert.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like the pendulum swings both ways, I think. And I think when you're in that extrovert mode, it's amazing to be out there. And then when you are in that introvert mode and you don't have anything left to give to anybody, let alone almost yourself at times, it can be hard.
I'm great with like, you know, a few people at once. And then when there's a lot of them and it's just me, I mean, performing in general, I think goes against my nature in so many ways, my basic nature. I mean, I sit in my van for like a good 15 minutes before I go to the grocery store and try to like map out the most efficient route.
I like that.
I need onions, broccoli. Then there's this can of beans I need at like 6, and then I'm out. It's funny performing and playing shows. I think like what you were talking about, like if you could choose one, I just think you need them both because
Yeah.
I don't know if there would be that fire under me to write as hard if I didn't feel like I was going to be able to share it with people,
Do you feel like in your career, as the venues got bigger and bigger, that it affected your songwriting? Or do you feel like day one is the same as day 5,000, wherever you are now in your songwriting?
With songwriting, yeah, I feel like I always thought it was like evolutionary. Like one day I'm going to be really good at this. Like every record's going to be better and better.
Yeah.
And I realized that's total BS. Like every song is just like it's like hitting trip reset on the truck, like the mileage, and you're starting with nothing. And that's what I love about it too, but it's not this evolutionary like, oh, I wrote that song and now I can write an even better song.
I know what you mean. It's not like I got my bachelor's and now my master's and now my PhD and now my doctorate. If only it were that easy.
We were just talking about that Tom Waits quote about like the first record, like or young artists, like, or
I think
I've
it was
heard
Jeff Tweedy. I think he said,
Jeff
I think
Tweedy.
he said something like young artists are just always inspired and older artists, they need to find that inspiration.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't even know if the word inspired, but I'm just generally near an instrument and I'm just generally recording ideas. And I feel really lucky that fire has almost never burned out. I think when I was younger, I'd get really into golf for a week.
Right.
And then after a month, I was like, I hate golf. I'm going to get into tennis. Just these things. I'm like into chess now. And I'd go to chess classes and then like...
I was into chess.
Yeah. I still kind of am into chess.
Sweet.
But music is the one...
You got to play out.
Yeah. The one muse, the one vice, the one obsession that's never really waned. And I feel really lucky for that. Even 20 years ago, going up to a guitar and just like that G major chord, you're like, oh, I have 15 great ideas for this one G major chord.
Mm-hmm.
And now at 38 years old, you're like, that doesn't always do it for me. And
Totally.
I have to find that thing that is so exciting. And I think my biggest fear as an artist is not knowing when I'm starting to stink and wane, and go down in talent. It's almost like it's going to happen, but we're not going to be aware of it. And I'm like, just please, if somebody's listening, just make me aware of it so that I can like, maybe I can like put the, proverbial piano down for like.
Right. So like we all have this kind of secret fear of like, when are we going to put out like that record that's just like, okay, he's like lives in a mansion now and he's got like 80 kids and like, he doesn't need to play, like
yeah,
that
and
kind
it's
of
just
record.
like a very clean, high def.
Yeah. There's like some kids songs on it.
Yeah. And it's like, oh man, I loved his second and third album. His 13th album is so bad.
So bad. Yeah.
But like you still see that person on stage performing with the same vim and vigor.
Yeah, for sure.
And you sometimes wonder, how did that disconnect happen? And I think it's a slow process. I'm not going to name any bands, but I bet you there's like a number of bands that I can only name on one hand that have never like quote unquote broken my heart. Like, I don't know, Pink Floyd, Radiohead, maybe the Talking Heads.
Oh, you mean their whole
almost
catalog.
like the whole discography.
Oh yeah, Leonard Cohen for me. I love Dylan's new stuff now.
Yeah.
Like his Sinatra stuff was so cool, and Springsteen's like that. I feel like he's gotten better weirdly.
And it's contextualized too by their age. It's like the fact that Dylan is probably in his 80s, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that he's still putting out music. I mean, I just bought Philip Glass's new album, and I think he's 79 or 82. Or, I don't know, but he's putting out this amazing album that feels almost like record that sounds like he's 17 on piano playing. It's just so... He's
adventurous.
Still, and also still garnering that childlike wonderment. And I'm like, man, sometimes that, like, even at 35, I was like that jaded dude. So, how do you keep that going into your 60s, 70s, and 80s that you still are like, I want to go through, the whole mixing and mastering the album and putting it out at that age. And I think that's just so inspiring.
And that's, I've heard of that quote that was like, you have your whole life to make your first record and you got 6 months to make your second or whatever.
Yeah.
And how much pressure we all feel, when you bleed into a record, when you make, like, when you really just put everything you have and you go broke and live in your car and you can't like hold a relationship down and you're just like obsessed. And then you finish and you're like, I could never go through that again,
Mm-hmm.
Like, how am I going to make something again?
Yeah. No, that's how I feel too. I feel like, when you're really hungry and you can't imagine ever being full again, and vice versa, when you've had an amazing meal and you're stuffed and you can't imagine being hungry again. That's kind of how I feel after an LP.
Yeah.
Whether it's with the Lumineers or even the piano stuff, where I'm like, man, there's just so much work.
Yeah.
And then like a week later, I'm like, oh yeah, here's a new idea for the next project. And it's this great sort of rinse and repeat, but you want to try to avoid the pitfalls of a truly rinse and repeat. You want to keep that evolution that you spoke of earlier, but
I mean, it's so much work to even make something that's shitty.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's funny. I work here on this farm with 2 other people that we run this farm together. And sometimes we'll be like listening to music out there, planting or something. And there'll be like we'll just change up the station or whatever. And it'll be like this pop country stuff. And we're getting, and then, they'll be laughing like, this song is so bad. And I'm like, you guys, there's drums on it. This took like probably months to mix.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like, and high-level engineers,
yeah, high level, like
breaking their backs.
For sure, yeah.
I like you mentioned that we're here on your farm, so beautiful, speaking inside your studio, and I'm wondering how much of your identity is the musician, or do you almost look at it like, I love working in the farm, I love making music, but it's not my whole identity, or is musician sort of like?
Yeah, it goes back to like school and stuff. Like when you're a kid and you're like, what do you want to do? That question, it was so heavy,
Firefighter.
And right, yeah,
well,
astronaut.
You're like 8 years old.
Magician.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a professional cartoonist.
Oh,
and
that's
there was
cool.
I grew up in Philly, or I went to school, and you were in New Jersey, right?
Yeah, you were in Philly?
Yeah.
I know that.
And there was this guy on TV when we were kids called Bruce Blitz. Do you remember his cartoon show? It was like on NJN, New Jersey Network.
Wow.
And
that's awesome.
He was amazing. And
so he inspired you to be, that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, for sure. But it's funny. I feel like I'm a musician when I'm playing music.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like picking something is so limiting. Music was something I always did. It was always part of my life. I always did it after work or before work. And I would think about it at work. And then I started playing gigs at night after work, And it was just part of my day.
Yeah.
And I still feel that way about it. We were talking about like kids like waiting by the bus asking for like, how do I be a musician? Like advice,
Yeah.
I'm like, I am the wrong person to ask advice. I just really think that however many musicians there are on the planet, however many people there are on the planet, that's how many versions of this there is. I've always been a grower. I went to, my education was horticulture, mycology, soil science stuff. And I've always loved that. And, I was always kind of, curious, like, could I actually do music like for a job, like for real, like instead of just like the gig in the ski resort up in the mountain, like after laying flagstone or whatever, my landscaping job or whatever. I'm like, maybe is this possible? And it kind of reminded me of like, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with this game Metroid.
I remember that.
Yeah, Nintendo. And like I would just play obsessed like every day after school. Months probably went by, and eventually, I beat it, and like at the end of the game, actually, Metroid, the last part of the game is you're fighting this giant brain.
Wow.
And sorry for spoiler alert, everybody on Metroid, but at the end, and this is so like early 80s or whatever game, Metroid takes off all of their armor and it's like this hot chick with a bikini and all of our minds are blown like, no way, like, like you totally couldn't do that now, like it'd be so bizarre. But sorry about the spoiler about Metroid, but
I think enough time has passed that the spoiler,
Yeah, but like months went by and I was like, I forgot what my friends were up to. I forgot what dirt smelled like. I forgot like what going outside was. And music's very similar. Like I worked so hard, with gigs, and eventually I was playing like 250 shows a year, chasing a bus, the whole band was able to pay rent. It was amazing. And I was, at the end of the year, I was just like super depressed. I was like,
that's a lot.
I really missed my life, like working with soil and plants and my normal job, So now I've been in this place of trying to balance the two, which is like a bizarre existence. I'm still learning how, to do them gracefully and well. And that's why I have very little advice for musicians, If like a young, small-scale market farmer that wanted to put out records in the shoulder seasons in the winter came to me, I'd be like, yeah, I got a few tips. But like other than that, like I have nothing to say. Like I don't know. I mean, especially you, like with Lumineers, it's like, that's like big boy touring.
I mean, you were just playing Red Rocks. It's pretty big.
Well, and we did a run. We opened a run for you through Canada and the U.S., and they were insane. Like,
it was amazing.
And I'd never seen a show in a hockey place and like basketball places and baseball place. It's so funny. Steve was like, "They're called stadiums, dude. Don't call it a baseball place." He's like, "You are not into sports."
Baseball place, I like that.
Yes, like we were playing football places.
Man, that was some of the most memorable touring for all of us. I mean, just having you guys out on the road, and it just was such a pleasure to watch y'all every night. Just be so inspired night after night, and just to be able to do that. I remember in Canada, we went out for some coffee and we were just taking photos and stuff. And that's the really cool part of touring. That's when touring is super high level, when you feel like you get a whole night of great music, high art, where the hang and the catering, and the backstage hang, everybody's just like, it's not even about necessarily being friends, but it's friendly, it's vibey.
Yeah.
There's a great atmosphere. And that's when touring is very addictive. You're like, oh, I want to do this all the time.
That was really fun. Yeah. And it was so different than, we've just never played in spaces like that. And I was realizing like, oh, you can have an intimate show in a space like this. And that's possible. And that was so mind blowing to think.
When you play a small place, you want to make it feel like an
big
arena,
place.
and when you play a big place, you want to kind of get that pin drop thing where I think for us, we learned a little bit trial by fire, where we only had our first album. It was like 10 or 11 songs. And then quickly, which is, I guess, like what you want to blow up, but it was a lot of change fast. And I think for me, I'm sort of like George Costanza from Seinfeld, where like when I start to see success, I'm very pessimistic, or I'm like questioning it, where like when we went from the 15 pass vehicle, to the bus, I almost start to feel fearful that something's got to give. You're going to be working back at the sushi den in Denver, being a busboy. Something, the wheels are going to fall off somewhere. And I just don't allow myself to go into that autopilot, whether it's being a husband, a father, a musician, a bandmate. I never want to be like, oh, I just got this. Because I feel like the day I start to say that, whether out loud or internally, I'll probably start to really suck at any of those things.
If anything, the opposite thing happens, where you're like, I can't believe people like after work came to this show and parked.
That's a lot.
And found dinner or someone to watch their cat or kid or
that's
grandparents.
A lot. I remember
it's insane.
I remember thinking back to when I was 17, 18, 19, going to see Radiohead at the Tweeter Center in Camden, New Jersey, or seeing Kings of Leon at the Bowery Ballroom, or seeing Coldplay at Madison Square Garden when they had their second album out. Rage Against the Machine, I saw at Randall's Island. It's like, the train, buy cigarettes, get some beers.
Yeah.
Maybe you park. Maybe somebody drove there that wasn't drinking, of course. All that stuff. It costs a lot of money. It's like a big commitment.
It's a huge.
Maybe you buy a T-shirt, merch.
Totally.
Being a fan of something is no joke. So when someone is a fan of either of us, it's sort of like, I think I experienced a little bit of imposter syndrome almost, where I'm like, man, all these people here just to see us, where you almost have to strike that balance though. For lack of a better word, it's almost untruthful to be like, oh, well, this doesn't make any sense. Like somewhere even subconsciously, you're like, well, I work really hard at music. I work so hard and making the band members all great. And we try to write this music. So there has to be a little bit, at least, of almost admittance of like, okay, this is happening and I get it. But I think at times I'm like, well, this is also crazy and I don't get it. And it's a little bit of trying to strike that balance of like disbelief and gratitude.
Most musicians give up when especially during the period of time when you're in a van every day, all day, you're driving the whole day and you're lucky to get to sound check in time, you're unloading. And then maybe there's a friend's house or a hotel, but you don't want to leave your gear in the car and you unload again. So you're loading in and out like 3 times.
I'll never forget. I remember we were touring in Bozeman, Montana, opening up for Langhorne Slim at the filling station. And it was like December 18th or something. So like, a foot of snow, Bozeman, Montana, mid-December, which is crazy to be doing that. But we were opening up for Langhorne Slim, huge opportunity. And I remember we got there, we're about to miss our sound check. And, you're sprinting from the van, you're trying to get the drums set up. You're screaming at each other. It's such a vibe. And I remember seeing Langhorne and I think it was 4 of them at the time. So Langhorne and his 3 bandmates, they were eating Chipotle, like relaxed at the table. And it blew my mind. I was like, holy cow.
Right.
You guys are like eating a meal that like, which they were just eating a meal.
Yeah.
But in my mind, there was like, wow, they look relaxed.
Yeah, totally.
And they had like a small crew, I think, helping them set up some stuff. And it was mind blowing.
Yeah.
And you can forget that feeling so fast.
Oh, yeah.
But it was good to remember those moments too, where I was like,
Oh, yeah.
that's so, I was like, where'd you guys get that food? They were like, there's a place down the street. And like, you know, we had 30 minutes before we started a set. You're starving. Your body is like destroyed from like those moments. You can forget about them quickly. But it's good to remember those because they kind of make you into the artist and into the person that.
Absolutely. If you can do that, I feel like that's 90%.
Yeah.
It just gets a little bit easier. Even the rooms, like when you actually have someone that's working like front of house sound for you, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't have to stand there and raise my hand for more snare drum anymore.
I think that was the
Like
first.
it's saved somewhere in a thing.
I think that was the first person we hired.
Yeah.
Which was mind blowing. I think they came
Yeah.
on as front of house / driver / tour manager / like photographer. You know, it's just something like that. And at the time, that's kind of the norm for that level where, and then we got like, you know, a tour manager and a lighting person.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's no way we can afford this.
Yeah.
And
Lighting was big for me early because I don't even know if it's a condition or something, but if there's lights on my face, like on my eyelids, I rarely open it. I've never actually seen a show that I played. It's too distracting for me, but even if I'm closing my eyes and there's lights on my eyelids, I'll forget words. I started having to wear a hat on stage early on so that the lights wouldn't be on my face. And I still wear that same hat just so that the lights, you know, because it'll totally fuck me up.
can you go to that place easily?
Yeah.
Like, is it when you close your eyes, so before the show, you get on stage, can you get into that place where you need to be quite
Yeah.
easily?
Instantly.
That's great.
Although, you know, like I said before, you know, like performing is definitely not in my my basic nature.
Yeah, I'm getting the impression that you almost, you chose, or the universe was like, let's make this guy front man, lead singer. He's going to hate it.
God, like I played drums in a band for, you know, high school, kind of mostly like punk, hardcore bands and stuff. And I'd always have these kind of like mellow acoustic songs in my bedroom, you know, the whole time. But drums was like my main instrument. And then I started like leaving the bedroom and playing like coffee shops, open mics and stuff like that, which were fucking terrifying. I had a day off in Athens, Georgia, and I went to Eddie's Attic, and they had an open mic. We used to play there too. And I was just like, I'm just going to do this. Like,
Wow.
it was still just as terrifying. You know, you're like waiting for your number, no reverb,
Yep. Just straight up you and
straight up
all the mistakes and all the
everything,
nuances.
just the song really. And it was cool. In San Francisco, I had a night off and I was doing laundry. There was a place there in the Mission called Brainwash. You ever been there? It's a laundromat, but it's also a bar and you can get breakfast.
No, that's great.
It's
No.
great, and you can wait. And they had an open mic, and there's like a guy with a parrot and a flute, and
Part
I was
of
like,
that.
"Fuck it, I'll sign up." I'm waiting for my dryer, you know, and it was so sweet. I was playing the Great American the next night, and I played. You could just play one song, and there was a guy with a flute, and then a guy that told like a Yeats poem, and then like a guy with a parrot and stuff. And the guy with the parrot was one of the hosts. And just real character. And then, you know, I got my dryer. I played that one song. And he came up to me, the two guys came up to me and they were like, "Hey, we were talking and we thought your song was really good. And next week we want you to do 2 songs as be the feature of our open mic." And I was like, this is the greatest compliment
Big leagues.
of all time. And I was like, "Oh, that's so sweet. I'm just passing through. I have a show tomorrow." But it was like, that's such a cool feeling to be able to connect in that setting, you know, in a setting like that.
Yeah.
Because it's easier when you're playing a giant theater and, you know, it's dark and the room sounds great and, you know, you can whisper.
Ironically, you agree with that, right? When
Yes.
it's kind of bigger and you have the band and
That's
stuff.
right.
I mean, I just did my first ever bona fide piano show was in Turin, Italy, where I live now. And it was this place called OGR, 150 cap room.
Yeah.
It was me on piano and then drummer, cellist, upright bass, violin. And we were doing a double set that night. And this is coming off the tail of like pretty big shows with the Lumineers, maybe 15 to 25,000 people. I mean, we did a show in Wrigley that I think was 42,000 people. And there's a 150 person room, and I was on the verge of like vomiting. I was so nervous. I went out and played the worst. I made the worst mistake ever.
Yeah.
I went out and started the set with like the most delicate, fragile. It's a B-side sort of called Lullaby. It's so fragile and it's so specific, the voicings, and it's just me and the piano. And I sort of was like, oh, I'll do this thing that Talking Heads did and stop making sense, where it'll be just me and the piano, and then just me and the piano and maybe cello. And then we'll bring out the violinist and the upright bass and the drums one by one. So it was just me and the piano. And I hated I'm not joking, every second of that set, that hour set. It just was this, literally like this flood of anxiety. And then we took a little bit of a break. You know, it was like a 30-minute changeover for the next group of people.
Yeah.
And I said to everybody, that was like, you guys were great. That was the worst way to start the set. Let's start with this other song called Chili. Everybody's in on Chili. It's got this like crazy, like,
Great
you know, this, and live, there's drums and all this. I changed it to try to make it more like upbeat or whatever you want to call it. And I said, listen, guys, like, let's just play this second set. Like, fuck it. Let's just have fun. And it was then the complete opposite. I loved music. I loved my songs again. I loved performing.
Well, and also that's your hometown right now. Right?
Yeah.
And that's, even when we play Red Rocks here, you know, that's like our home, you know,
Well, even opening up for you at Red Rocks, like
And you're
my
from-
mom, but
yeah.
my mom's in the crowd. And
Yeah,
I,
sure,
I
you're-
like see Kathy Fraites
you're like,
in the crowd. I'm like,
oh yeah, your
my
third grade
God.
teacher. There's your like old landlord. Like it's just, there's just a different.
It's kind of easier when you're like, I'm just in.
Let's go to Omaha.
Yeah. Or
Let's
like
play.
you were just in what, Australia, New Zealand or something?
totally.
It's like, I don't know anybody there. I'm a tourist. There's no pressure
No
in a
pressure,
way.
yeah.
And it's cool because you're so far from home. But man, yeah, now for me doing the Denver area shows, and then I guess now Turin has that hometown.
Yeah.
And it's always the show that you look forward to the most, or that you notice the most on the calendar. But then you're like, oh man, so many friends are going to be backstage. So many people are going to
Yeah.
come.
And then like the next day we're like, oh, we're in Salt Lake City. That's going to be badass.
Yeah. And you kind of like, you almost, it's hard to be present at those shows because there's it's like the New Year's Eve complex where you're like, we have the best night ever. And then the best days of your life are the ones you don't plan. It's just random.
That's right. Yeah.
Maybe you're like at a park at 3 p.m. having a sandwich with your friend or something, and you just have this amazing conversation, something that you didn't plan and was sporadic. I need to get better at that when I'm looking at the calendar and I'm like, oh, this show, The Gorge, for
Sure,
example.
yeah.
The Gorge, you know, it's
Yeah.
just, you put so much onus on it.
Uh-huh.
And then you're almost not present.
We did this farm in Portland. I loved it. Like I love playing this, like the high dive. And
What was your bucket list, or what is your bucket list? Either one.
I don't know if that is a thing. It's not a thing for me. I genuinely love playing, and it's never stopped. That's never stopped for me. You know, I know my bandmates, like Red Rocks was a huge deal, and I was a little scared, honestly, about it. But the best thing that I remember, you know, our first time playing there was like sound check was so cool. It's like you sound like Thor. It's like it's an empty arena, and
Yeah.
you're like Jack, and it's just like giant.
It's incredible. It might still literally be the best venue.
It's amazing.
You
Yeah.
know, dare I say, in the world. It's really stunning. It's
Yeah.
it's so unique, and it's incredible opportunity to play there. Unreal.
I think you and I share this. It's also like a hometown show, so you know your landlord's there, and you feel kind of funny.
That's awesome.
Your mom's like, "You mumbled.
Yeah. What did you say?
Speak more clearly."
I actually wanted to ask you something. So
Yeah.
I'm so over the moon about the No Surprises radio cover that we made together. It's just such a fun, dare I say, easy collaboration with you. And it ticked all the boxes that I was hoping to do with that song with you. And I think it's pretty interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did you know the song very well? Or
No,
almost not at all.
See, I'm a pretty bizarre, I guess, musician, professional musician. I just sort of got into the Beatles like 2 years ago. Like I just didn't grow up with that. And I was like, oh, like Paul McCartney's amazing. What's that record? I knew they had that White Album and stuff. But then with Radiohead, like my band's obsessed with Radiohead. My little brother too, he's an amazing musician. He's upset. I just never like had to dive in.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
I grew up with like Michael Jackson, Leonard Cohen, Paul Simon. Yeah.
I was a late Beatles bloomer as well, where I kind of hated them in high school. I don't know why, but funnily
It's cool to
enough-
hate stuff in high school. Yeah.
Especially popular stuff.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, Radiohead, my buddy Blake, he actually showed me Pyramid Song. It was junior year of high school. We were driving around in his car, and he showed me Pyramid Song, which is one of Radiohead's really weird songs. So for Radiohead standards, it's a very weird Radiohead song. Today, it's one of my favorites, but at the time, I was like, I hate this. This is just, I didn't like Tom York's voice, the piano. I don't even know what time signature it is. It's so out there.
Yeah.
And now it's like one of my favorite songs by them, but maybe I didn't get it. Maybe I wasn't ready for them at the time. And then over the years, they just became my favorite band, and they still are. But, I remember tooling around with this song. And actually, Dave Barron, my co-producer, co-mixer, co-engineer, he's worked on tons of Lumineers stuff. He worked on Piano 1. And of course, again, on this record, he actually said in the first record, he said, have you thought about either doing something original or a cover with a singer? And for that first record, I was just so stubborn. I was like, it's got to be just piano.
I love that instrumental record.
Thank you so much.
When you asked me to do that collaboration, I was like, are you sure this isn't going to ruin a pristine instrumental? I
was like, he'll say no. He'll definitely say no. And then I'll just be sad for a day. And then I'll just do an instrumental version of it. It'll be great. But he said, yeah, have you thought about working with anybody else? And I thought, well, it's called Piano. I really want it to be piano. I don't want really any drums on the song. And I don't want too much strings. I feel like that's the classic pitfall, at least in my head. So I had all these arbitrary imaginary rules.
Yeah.
Second album, I was tooling around with the melody, trying to find it almost like a kid, like not really understanding my way around the piano with that song in particular. And then just like you and me, we had really, I don't know, gotten to know each other and bonded so much on touring with each other. I thought, man, and he's like a champion of piano. I feel like this might be really cool. And we'd done the Red Rocks gig. So I thought, maybe he'll actually be into this. And there was so much pressure in my mind when I asked you. I was like, he has to say yes. Or this is like, and then when you did, it was just, we were off to the races. And I remember a really cool moment. I remember when we were working on the song, I think either I prompted it or you asked me, you're like, I don't know what key I'm going to sing it well in. Can you just send me all the keys?
I still tell people that story because...
Which is 12 notes, right? The chromatic scale is like...
I think we did like 8 or 9.
Yeah, so we almost hit every key.
And that alone, I mean, that's how I like to work. I just want to know if I'm doing a collaboration, like let's dive in. Like, let's just actually figure out how this can be great.
So I remember sending you, like 8 or 9 of the keys, which anyone, listening to this, that's a lot. And that's what I loved about it. It was, I think we had this, like, you sound really low in the verse, but the chorus sounds amazing, but the verse is too low.
Yeah.
I think you had sent me 3 different versions.
Yeah.
And then, on the iPhone, I'm trying to do like a blind taste test, so to speak, where I didn't want to know what I was listening to.
Yeah.
I listened to one version. I was like, that was cool. I listened to another version. And that second version, I closed my eyes, just alone in that hotel room, headphones on, and I just closed my eyes, and I just remember like levitating off the couch, and I was like, I don't even care what Gregory's input is. Is at this point, this is going to be the key.
And was it F?
It was the one we did it. It was the D sharp, E flat major for the studied, studied minds. I was like, almost like, I hope Gregory doesn't fight me on this because his voice is just like obliterating me right now. And I mean, thankfully you were like, I love that one too.
Cool. Yeah.
But it was the one that made the record.
And it was uncomfortably low in moments. And I'm cool with that.
It was just so cool to try to take a song that by an iconic band. And I think it was cool for us to be like, well, the original has a lot of drums. Let's stay away from drums.
Yeah. I don't even think we added guitar.
No. In the beginning of this conversation, you had said that some songs reject that stuff, and some songs, it's so funny. Sometimes you're like, I want this song to be huge. And I don't mean charts and Grammys. I mean sonically and emotionally gigantic. And you just throw all this stuff at it. And sometimes it's like, nope. And then some songs you're like, I want it to be, this is going to be a quiet song.
Yeah.
And then you start to add banjo and bass and strings and drums and background vocals. And,
And there's reverb and
it just all works. And you're like, okay, now this song's huge. And the huge song is like the most intimate song on the record. That's funny how that happens.
Yeah.
But for this one, I think that it really takes me away where I was almost too close to the original and too close to the source material. And I think it was really good that you came in with almost finding your way in the dark.
Oh yeah. I had to like listen to the song. I mean, of course I remember it from like high school.
Yeah. There's this really amazing writer I found through social media. He sort of became a friend of a friend, and then he became a friend. His name's Jedediah Jenkins.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And I want to give credit where credit's due. And he's a phenomenal writer. And he does these sort of like one-a-day posts on Instagram where he'll just photo of whatever. He'll write a little blurb, and every blurb is like better than the last. It's really profound and inspiring, thought-provoking. And he talked about this idea of, you know, when you're looking for an idea, it's almost like being in your kitchen with the lights all off and you're scrambling, touching everything. And sometimes you touch the thing you want, and sometimes you're touching the hot stove and you burn your hand. So I was almost thinking about you coming into this project where I'm like obsessed, like Radiohead.
Yeah.
So, you know, and then you had to find your way. And I think for me, you know, it's so hard when you start to collaborate with someone, that trust that, you know, 1 + 1 is going to make 3. That it's not just going to be like, well, Gregory's going to do his thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm just going to sit back, and then I'm just going to do my thing, and he's just going to sit back. It's like you want just the right amount of friction and just the right amount of, ooh, you're taking me out of my comfort zone a little bit or a lot. And I remember I didn't want to press it too hard, but there's this thing that Tom York does in the original where I didn't know he was singing this, but it's these lyrics, get me out of here. And it's this crazy reverb BV like choir of Tom York. And I was like, why don't you just try something like that? I don't even know if we'll use it. And you sent me that. And at that point, it was just literally piano and then just your vocals. And then you did that BV background vocal thing on the final chorus. And I just had like full body goosebumps.
And that was a MIDI keyboard sketch.
Yeah.
time.
And it was really
Yeah.
simple. I mean,
Very
that
simple,
that
yeah.
take, you were singing over like a caveman's performance of piano,
Yeah.
which I was sort of like, it's one of those things that's funny where you're like, I wanted to give you not too much information because the more quote unquote trained I become on the piano, the more you can lose that. It's almost like if you're Picasso, you spend your whole life getting better, but just how can you draw a circle? You know, or just how can you make a Stussy sign simple, or a cube, you know, whatever. It's not like, oh my gosh, this person drew a picture of a face and it was like geometrically perfect. You know, there's a time and a place for that. But
I love that Stussy sign.
yeah, so Picasso drawing, like, he spends his whole life breaking barriers, and you're like, yo, draw me. Remember doing the Joker Stussy sign? Did you ever do that? With the jester hat? That was
sure, yeah.
6th grade math class, that was my like
Yeah,
go-to.
Stussy signs. I was a big skateboarder in school, and I remember they had 3 lines at the top, and 3
lines at the bottom,
yeah, and 3
and then
lines at the bottom, and
2 diagonals.
Uh-huh.
And then you could do the normal, just like 2/3 of the triangle hat. I was a big jester, Joker Stussy.
Was that like a weed thing?
I don't even know. I think it was like a punk, probably weed thing. I was like many years from discovering weed. We digress. I think that, yeah, just you reacting over that piano. And then I think I recut the piano to your take. And then I think it was this cool thing where then you re-sang some stuff, but you kept some of the really simple stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just, I don't know. It was just
It
so
was fun to work with you, Jared, because you care as much as I do. My bandmate Steve lives here on the farm too, and he'll walk into the studio, and I was recording this song Second Chances for a few records ago, and I had, for some reason, it was one of those songs that just was having a hard time being recorded, and I think I did like a few BPM, like maybe 2 BPM faster, and 1 regular. And I played them both. I'm like, which one do you like? He's like, you're insane. He's like, I don't get you. They're exactly the same. And I'm like, they clearly are not the same.
No, that makes a big, I'm
And
not discrediting Steve.
no, he's probably
He's
right.
so
I love it.
talented.
He was right in a lot of ways, but to me, one had this emotive quality and the other one was lacking.
Oh, it makes a difference. My piano records, also with Lumineers records, sometimes you're like, no click. The click is just your worst enemy. And sometimes you want that locked in feel and striking that balance. And then, drawing in the BPM.
Right.
freehand, so to speak. I mean, all that stuff, though, it really does make a difference. Even working on that one song with you, the amount of time and energy that goes into one, like you said before, even to make something bad requires so much work and to care so much. It's funny, songwriting for me almost simultaneously brings out the worst and best in me, where I start to feel like I'm a kid again, which is obviously the best, that, and you start to feel wonderment and you start to feel excited. And then also just these very like adult emotions of like panic and anxiety and I'm confused. I'm never going to figure this out.
Yeah.
Which is so stupid.
It feels like the biggest existential.
It almost, I mean, this is
problem.
Dramatic. It almost feels like you're going to die.
Yeah,
sometimes.
that's right.
Where
yes.
you're almost like, Jer, that inner voice, like, what are you actually afraid of?
Yeah.
Because it is that existential suffering,
Yes.
but you're almost like, I'm going to die.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
That's a very intense way to look at it. Pele, some consider the greatest of all time, soccer. I think Pele said, somebody once said that soccer, and I'm sure he said football, but for us Americans, we'll say soccer.
Yeah.
He said, soccer is a matter of life and death. And he said, I disagree. It's more.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about music.
Yes.
Which is not always like
Yes.
good. And
I have to remind myself, I'm like, bro, this is just songs. Like, we're not curing cancer here. Come on. This is a B-side that like the random like nerdy fan that's going to connect with you about, you're going to feel the same and maybe no one else will like it, but it matters so much. Yeah, man, I feel you 100%.
And I know what you mean. You can't take yourself too seriously, but I think when you're starting out, you were talking about what advice do you give to young musicians? And I almost find myself saying, well, this is what I did, and I don't know if it's going to work for you. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot of heartache and a lot of strife and a lot of grief to get, quote unquote, successful. And I don't even know if I would recommend that. The amount of like obsessing. I mean, I remember in Ramsey, New Jersey, where I grew up, that's where the band started. And Wes, when we were early days Lumineers, Wes was coming over at Christmas. Like, he'd come over at 2 or 3 p.m. after that big lunch. And we'd be meeting up at like 7 a.m. before he'd go to his job at the, as a butcher at this market that he worked at. And it was like, I don't even know if I'd recommend that level of insanity to other people, but it worked for us. And every band's story is different.
Well, the great scene in Walk Hard, Dewey Cox,
I love that movie.
It's amazing. But like, he has this song and the next second he's, she's like, Dewey Cox, don't you write a song right now? And he'll just like, wait, walk hard, And then it cuts to him in the studio. Yep. First take, guys just get the beat.
Yeah.
It's all printed. And the next second it's on the radio and it's amazing. And that's how you kind of think the studio is in writing songs. Like you're like, and then a part of me growing up was like, well, I'm not good. So I have to actually work at this. Like I'm not going to, like other people just go in and cut the track. And then I'm like, I'm not actually good. I have to like work like 8 times harder. And then you realize like everybody has to work 8 times.
And you hope something amazing comes out in months from now.
Yeah.
And that you nurture it and you take care of it. I've always thought that for me, like, I'm like, man, I have to work so hard at music just to be half decent. Is that like it for everybody? And I think it's kind of, I think there's the rarefied, Prince, James Brown, Michael Jackson, like Jack Antonoff. Some of these people, they just seem to have the Midas touch. Everything they touch turns to gold. And I'm like, man, everything I touch turns to rust.
Yeah. And then you realize like all those guys have giant trash cans and they just make a lot of work and they.
No, you're right. You kind
everybody
of like if you just live in like the Instagram version of the world and you're like, oh, well, they're just always.
I don't know though. Michael Jackson's pretty badass.
He was badass.
I think he actually. I don't think he ever threw anything out. Like We Are the World actually is what got me into music.
Really?
Like when I was a kid, because my parents had got me the single and I had the Fisher Price record player.
Oh wow, cool.
But We Are the World was like, and then the cover of the album was, it was Lionel Richie, Dylan, Springsteen. I mean, had never heard of any of these guys. Like I'm, like Hall & Oates. Like I was like, oh, what do they do? And then like, like all these, and that song was huge. I just played it over and over and over again, And I was like, oh yeah, it's just like a random collaboration Michael Jackson decided to do, like for
It's crazy.
It's like
even his like B side was somebody's
for sure
hopeful A side.
Yeah, well, badass, dude. Oh, I love you.
Great.
I think you're good.
Cool.
Yeah. Sweet. Later.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Jeremiah Fraites and Gregory Alan Isakov for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform and check out all the great stuff at talkhouse.com. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.